Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome President and CEO of the State Collaborative on Reforming Education, David Mansouri.
All right, good morning. Thank you all so much for being with us. We have folks with us here in person at the State Museum. We have many folks who are joining us virtually across the state, across the country for this event. Really appreciate you all taking the time to be with us today. So as you all know well, exploring the connection between post-secondary credentials and economic opportunity for students and for our state is top of mind for leaders in Tennessee. And at SCORE, focusing on this connection has provided really a new lens through which we are examining education, the workforce, and the connection between education and employment. And this lens has led us to ask new questions, to seek out new data, and to consider new policies and investments as we seek to ensure that all Tennessee students are prepared for careers that enable economic independence. This lens has also led us to convene a working group of state leaders around this topic and then to align on a framework for how we think about credential impact in Tennessee. A framework that considers important measures such as wage, job outlook, and stackability to assess how credentials and degrees lead to economic mobility and opportunity. In many states, these types of frameworks may be limited to one sector or to one credential type, but we hope that Tennessee's approach can be different by applying a framework to degrees and non-degree credentials alike, with non-degree credentials obviously being the focus of today's conversation. So, and we'll dig into this a bit more in a bit, but non-degree credentials are the range of credential options that provide shorter-term training for students and workers. They include a range of programs such as certificates, industry certifications, micro-credentials, occupational professional licenses, and even apprenticeships. And these options are far shorter in duration than many traditional degree programs. These credentials, we all know, can play an important role in unlocking career opportunity for Tennesseans. And as we'll see in the discussion today, applying an impact and quality lens for non-degree credentials is essential because both students and working Tennesseans are increasingly interested in these credential opportunities, and they can be a viable strategy to help meet state education and workforce goals. In our explorations of this topic, however, we've also learned that there is not yet clarity about the vast landscape of non-degree credentials and which ones are actually leading to high-wage, high-demand careers. We know there's opportunity in this space, but the complex landscape and limited data leave us with a lot of unanswered questions. So today's Institute intends to help answer some of these questions with a lineup of content and speakers who really represent leaders in education and workforce. So just a quick overview of our agenda today. We'll start with Mary Cypress Metz, SCORE's Senior Vice President of Strategy, who will provide a general overview of the complex landscape of non-degree credentials and the role they play for students, workers, and employers. And then we're honored to turn to our keynote speaker, Dr. Stephen Murray, President and CEO of the Strada Education Foundation, to share really a national perspective of what research and data tells us about non-degree credentials and places where we need to learn more as a state and as a set of partners focused on this work. And then we'll hear from several state leaders representing education and industry, Dr. Jeff McCord, Amity Schuyler, and Commissioner Denise Thomas. And it's in the intersection of these viewpoints where we'll identify opportunities to advance non-degree credentials that put students on pathways to economic independence and ensure our state's economy can thrive. So today we set out to better understand the role that non-degree credentials can play in meeting state education and workforce goals, and to elevate what information we need to unlock the opportunity of these credentials and bring really tangible benefit to the individuals who pursue them. And with that, I will turn it over to Mary Cypress Metz to start our conversation today. Thanks so much again for being here.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you all this morning, and I am looking forward to spending a little bit of time providing an overview of what we're talking about when we say non-degree credentials, what role non-degree credentials play in Tennessee, as well as opportunities around non-degree credentials briefly, before we turn to Stephen and our panel for a really rich discussion around how the non-degree credentials could connect here in Tennessee. Our hope is that this conversation can really help set the groundwork for future conversations around non-degree credentials as well. So I'm going to start by talking about what is a non-degree credential. And so when we say non-degree credential, we're actually talking about an umbrella term. And it's in some ways a complex umbrella term because it is describing what something is not rather than what something is. Because simply, a non-degree credential is a credential that does not result in a degree. And we'll talk more about then what does it result in, what is it. But there are some characteristics that are common in non-degree credentials. They are usually associated with certain competencies and skills. They're usually shorter in duration and connected to workforce needs. In your seat, you have a memo, and that memo lays out many of the characteristics of non-degree credentials. It outlines what we know and don't know about non-degree credentials and opportunities around that. So I'd encourage you all to look through that, but I'm also going to talk through some of it here today as well. So let's start by talking about what are the different types of non-degree credentials. If it's an umbrella term, what falls under the umbrella? And there are a lot of different categories up here on the screen, so I'm going to try to break it down a little bit for you. So we'll start with the first row on this slide. So the top row are credentials, non-degree credentials that are provided by post-secondary institutions. And so I'll start with 4-credit diplomas and certificates. So this is one category of non-degree credentials. These opportunities are typically awarded by TCATs and community college. It could include a TCAT Health IT certificate, among many others. We mention these here because they do technically fall under the non-degree umbrella because they don't result in a degree, even though they are provided at post-secondary institutions or eligible for financial aid. We have a lot of information on these because of that. To the right of those, however, we have non-credit certificates and trainings. These are also offered by post-secondary institutions, and students pursuing these options, however, are not awarded the post-secondary credit and aren't eligible for financial aid, but they're a very popular opportunity. In fact, nationally, the American Association of Community Colleges estimate that 40% of enrolled students at community colleges are enrolled in non-credit options. We don't have very much information about these, though. But when we think about a non-credit certificate in training, we think about a non-credit line worker training program, among many others. These are really important credentials. Next, I'm going to move to our second line, which is more industry-led non-degree credentials. I'll start with industry credentials themselves. These are options directly connected to what industry needs. For example, they're skilled specific certificates that are normally awarded by an exam. This would include things like OSHA 10, a certified EKG technician. They're very specific to an industry and what they need. But also industry-driven are apprenticeships. Apprenticeships are non-degree credentials. They're another option here. The earn and learn model is an important part of non-degree credentials that are often done in partnership between workforce training and employers and education. And an example of that, Tennessee was actually first in the nation to register a teacher apprenticeship with the U.S. Department of Labor. So lots of apprenticeship options, though, that are also under this umbrella. And then I'll move to the bottom row here, which are a couple of different types of option. On the bottom left here, we have occupational and professional licenses. These are unique because they normally require working in a specific field. And sometimes they require additional degrees or training, and sometimes they do not, because everything in this category could be anything from a real estate license to a nursing license. So they vary greatly in this category. And then finally, I'll jump to badging or micro-credentialing, which are the digital credentials that can be earned from platforms like Coursera or LinkedIn. These are emerging. We don't know much about them, but they're very much growing in popularity and connections to different skills and needs. And so if we didn't think the different options under the umbrella were complex, also the number of providers make it even more complex, because non-degree credentials, as you could probably assume from that last slide, are not offered all by one institution type or one provider. They're offered by a variety of providers, from education institutions, state agencies, employers, private third-party providers. And so I think the important takeaway here is that the instruction for awarding non-degree credentials can happen in a variety of contexts. And that's what makes them so unique and valuable, but also complex when we're talking about them. And so as we seek to get clarity and insight, it's essential to take into account the landscape and how broad it is when we're talking about non-degree credentials. And so that's a little bit about what is a non-degree credential, what are we talking about here today. But next, let's talk about what role they play, because that's really where I believe that it gets really important and exciting about the opportunity non-degree credentials have for our state. And so let's start by thinking about our workforce. And I know we'll talk about this more in our panel in a bit, but in Tennessee's workforce today, we don't have enough qualified Tennesseans to meet employer needs. And in fact, almost twice the number of open jobs as available workers that we have. And when you ask employers directly why that is, the majority report that it's the insufficient talent pipeline without the training and the skills that are needed. And we know that our labor force participation rate in our state is below the national average. And that's just for today's workforce. We also have to think about what's the workforce of the future, with new industry and business coming into our state, with the changing needs as AI enters this space, with more of a skills-based hiring approach. There's so many evolving needs, and non-degree credentials, because of how nimble and diverse they are, have the opportunity to really help us meet those needs in addition to other credential offerings. Because when you think about it, it's also something that many students find valuable, because students want flexible, affordable, and career-aligned education experiences. When you ask them about what's important and deciding what post-secondary pathway you choose, those are the things that students report are really important to them. And they also happen to match the characteristics of non-degree credentials. And so for some students, that non-degree credential pathway is really valuable and important. We know, and this is a data point we point to often, that 63% of jobs by 2031, so 6 years from now, are going to require some type of post-secondary credential. We know that's what our workforce in Tennessee is going to need and does need today. And when you break that down a little further about, okay, well, what type of post-secondary degree or credential is going to be needed just by credential type, you can see that this yellow category up here, which is some college, no degree, is the largest. Some college, no degree is about as broad of a term as non-degree credential itself, but it is the category that oftentimes non-degree credentials fall into. So this large category, 22% of our jobs are going to require what could be a non-degree credential. There's many types of non-degree credentials. And so it will be important for us to know more about these non-degree credentials to ensure that the short-term flexible nature of them, their ability to be responsive to the evolving needs of our workforce, and the way in which they're often so aligned to workforce need gives us so much opportunity. However, we have to know more about them to ensure that they're actually connecting to those jobs and the workforce needs that we have in Tennessee. And when I told you about the 6 different categories up there, really only that top left one is the one that we know much about. Who are the students and Tennesseans that are pursuing these opportunities? Which non-degree credential are they pursuing? Is it connected to the job that they're entering? Is it helping, are they completing those credential opportunities? Is it helping us to meet our workforce needs? And so there's so much opportunity for us to know that. And David mentioned up top, last fall, SCORE released a report that laid out a proposed impact credential, quality credential framework for how we could think about how are any degree or credential type connected to the needs of our state and the needs of our students, looking at earnings and job outlook and stackability. I'm not going to spend much time on this, but there are copies of the report out in the lobby if you want to grab one on the way out. But our vision for this was that this framework could apply to any credential type. However, today on non-degree credentials, we don't have a lot of information about how credentials would fall on this framework. So there's lots of opportunities to learn more about the impact of them while also ensuring that they are helping us to meet our education and workforce goals as a state. And so I'm excited to welcome up Dr. Stephen Murray. Stephen is the CEO of the Strata Education Foundation and is someone who knows deeply about non-degree credentials and the landscape nationally and the opportunities, and also has spent a lot of time thinking about where there are opportunities in Tennessee. Stephen is the former CEO of the Virginia Economic Development Partnership and the former Secretary of Louisiana Economic Development. So he has a great deal of expertise that he's going to bring and share with us before we invite up our panel for a discussion about these opportunities here in Tennessee. So Stephen, welcome up.
Thank you, Mary Cypress, and it is an absolute privilege to be back in Tennessee. You may not be able to see us. I have my orange polka dots on, bringing the school spirit a little bit. So excited to be with all of you today. One of the great things about America is that we offer multiple pathways to opportunity, but for too long, we've kind of privileged sort of a single path. Bachelor's degree and above. We privilege it in terms of funding, in terms of coaching, in terms of really the way we think about the labor market in America, even though the strong majority of jobs do not really call for a bachelor's degree or above. And so this space that we're talking about today and that Tennessee is really preparing to lead the country on is really, in my view, part of making the American dream a true possibility for everyone in Tennessee and everyone in our country. So I'm here today to talk about unlocking opportunity with non-degree credentials. I'm going to have to go really fast because I have a lot to say, so let me apologize for that in the beginning. Let me just first set the context a little bit. When we think about our work at Strata, we think about some of the students out there that we're interested in supporting, some of the individuals in the country. We have about 30 million people in the United States, last time I checked, that are working full-time, not in school, making less than $35,000 a year, including 4 million, more than 4 million that have a bachelor's degree or above, making less than $35,000 a year. Half of recent bachelor's degree graduates in the US that are employed are underemployed, are not working in a college-level job. That includes in Tennessee, roughly half. The strong majority of those are still underemployed a decade later. Millions of graduates or even non-completers are struggling to repay their student loans. They either didn't complete or didn't get a meaningful ROI. We have about 40 million people that completed some part of college but did not leave with a degree or credential that helps them to have an economic gain. And of course, we all know about the challenges faced by first-generation learners, low-income learners, and learners of color. These are the folks that we're interested in better supporting in the country. All of our research has led us to believe that there are really 5 keys to success, 5 keys to creating pathways to opportunity consistently in an equitable way in the context of post-secondary education and workforce training. I'm just going to briefly hit each of these. Clear outcomes, which is our big focus today, is all about providing the data that helps enable people to make well-informed choices about post-secondary education and training programs. This is a place where Tennessee is really poised to lead. Quality coaching. People need not just access to the data, but they need guidance, they need support, they need encouragement along the way to understand the pathways available to them, to overcome self-doubt, and to help sort of chart a path to the future. Affordability, absolutely essential. Everybody knows about that one. Work-based learning opportunities. One of the best ways to ensure good employment outcomes is paid internships or apprenticeships. And finally, employer alignment, making sure that the programs that we're offering actually lead to high-wage, high-demand jobs in the labor market. These are really the 5 keys to learner success from an economic mobility perspective. And today I'm really going to focus on the first one, and really a piece of the first one, and that is clear outcomes. Again, ensuring that everyone has access to accurate information that helps them make well-informed choices about post-secondary education and training programs. Let me talk about this non-degree credential space. This is there's just an explosion of activity in this sector. It is the fastest growing and least understood part of post-secondary education and workforce development. Let me just give you a few statistics. 53 million, more than 53 million Americans report having at least one workforce credential. There's more than 750,000 unique non-degree credentials according to Credential Engine in the United States. More than 17,000 individual credential issuer organizations, and more than 100 million cumulative credentials issued via Credly and Accredible. Again, a big, diverse space, and a space that is, compared to sort of the degree granting institutions and outcomes, just almost completely not understood today. And they're growing rapidly. This is the fastest growing part of post-secondary education. And as a sector, it's growing 4 times faster than 2-year and 4-year degrees in the US. So really big, growing very fast, and very poorly understood today. There's lots of different surveys out there about interest. Obviously, many people are still pursuing degrees, which is great. None of this is intended to be against degrees. But what we're talking about is giving people multiple pathways to opportunity. And what a lot of people are saying, this is just one example from a Strata survey a few years ago, is if they needed to get some kind of additional education or training, they're really looking for something that's a little bit more manageable, a little bit more bite-sized compared to a full 4+ year degree program. Skills training, non-degree credentials, apprenticeships, things like that are all things that people would like to have more access to, but also understand what works and what doesn't work. If you go out there and Google about outcomes for non-degree credentials, these are the kinds of headlines you will find. These are just a ton. These are just in the last couple of years, some of my favorites that I pulled up. Again, big, diverse space, very, very poorly understood today. So how do we make sense of these things? Well, making sense of these non-degree credentials is quite a big challenge. You've got an enormous patchwork of credential issuers, much less, first of all, it's massively bigger in terms of the number of credential issuers compared to post-secondary education. You have a few thousand versus roughly 20,000. The data is very siloed. We have a great national system for tracking both completions as well as earnings outcomes for traditional degrees. There's no corollary to that for non-degree credentials. We have no consistent way of tracking the completions, no consistent way of tracking outcomes either. And in particular, outcomes data is extremely rare because there's not a clear way to get that information. The information that we have today about earnings outcomes at the national level is mostly because federal financial aid recipients are able to connect their completion records with IRS tax records to get earnings outcomes information. If you've ever used a college scorecard, that's how that is produced. There is no corollary to the college scorecard for non-degree credentials today. If you tried to go find out, now you might be lucky, you might know someone, or maybe there's a particular industry that has a well-developed sort of framework for you to draw from, but if you're really trying to say, what's the full range of things out there and how do I choose, it's a really tough road right now. Particularly difficult is verified employment outcomes data. When we work with many of the largest non-degree credential issuers in the country, and what almost all of them say is, to the extent they have any outcomes data, it's from self-reported surveys of completers, typically maybe a 5 to 10% response rate. There's no reason to believe this 5 to 10% of respondents are similar to the completers overall, so that's a big problem. Rigorous research studies are super costly and unscalable. They're also rarely done, and so really you end up in this situation where reliable data on outcomes is just not available today. So this is both a big problem, but it is also an enormous opportunity for Tennessee to lead. And that's one of the reasons I'm excited to be here today. This data gap holds everyone back. Just think about each of these corners. Credential issuers can't really prove program effectiveness, so it makes it harder for them to attract students and to get funding. If you're employers, it's hard to differentiate what is high quality versus not. We talked to lots of employers. They're very, very interested in alternative pathways to degrees. They don't really have a good way to measure what works in most cases. Funders and policymakers, we lack reliable data to direct workforce funding effectively. And of course, learners, most importantly, don't have the information they need to make well-informed choices. So these are the big problems that we all need to work to solve collectively. Today, I want to highlight 4 key opportunities and really keys to a successful state non-degree credential or NDC data strategy for Tennessee and really for any state in the country. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say I think Tennessee might be the first state in the U.S. to get this done. You're definitely going to be in the first 5 for sure. So 4 key things. One is tracking NDCs or non-degree credentials inside higher ed. Second, tracking NDCs outside higher ed, which is a huge, diverse space. Third is implementing enhanced wage records. And fourth, creating a dedicated Office of Education and Economics. Those 4 things, you may say you have no idea what those things are. So I'm going to explain briefly what each of those things mean. So let me first start with NDCs in higher education. So first of all, let's talk about if we were to implement all of these things, what we would get, right? Everyone would be able to have better information with which to make well-informed choices, whether it's a credential issuer deciding what to offer or to expand, a learner deciding what program they're going to take, a policy maker designing a program to fund high-wage, high ROI aligned credentials. Lots of great outcomes if we get these, if we implement this effectively. You can also think about today versus the future, right? Right now, very, very limited understanding of non-degree credentials. There's a small subset that you can see, and again, Tennessee's been one of the leaders in trying to capture, for example, the credentials, the credit credentials that institutions are producing, but there's a much, much bigger space out there. Imagine everyone having actionable insights to make well-informed choices. Right now, you'd have to assume that if a credential was designed to prepare someone for a particular occupation, that they actually got that job. You have no way to prove that in Tennessee today. And by the way, in almost every state in America, that's true as well. And then most importantly, perhaps just this general black hole on outcomes versus an opportunity to really understand what's going on. So let me talk about each 4 of these keys, and then I look forward to the panel after that. So first of all, tracking non-degree credentials inside higher education. And by the way, if I forget to say this, I really just want to pause for a second and say I'm so impressed with so many great things that are happening in Tennessee right now. The recent credential impact framework that SCORE produced with a lot of engagement of partners across the state, I thought was really terrific. I think the first one in the country to look at credentials holistically, both traditional degrees and non-degree credentials. That was a great step forward. I think also some of the investments that have been happening like in TBR to better track non-degree credentials, very, very positive. So you got some great things to build on. But let's talk about tracking NDCs inside higher education. If we look at the community college sector, right, many millions of students mostly taking credit programs. This big piece, that top right piece I want to highlight, 2.7 million workforce training credentials, really a national data void where there's really not a good understanding of that. One of the state systems that we're working with right now in a different state has great state funding for non-degree credentials in their community college system that lead to or intended to lead to certain certifications. They have no way of determining if the student actually got the certification because the community college is not the certification issuer. We're going to talk about how to solve that problem. Some of the states that are doing a good job, a couple of states are doing some early great work in this area. Illinois, they collect individual level data on all non-credit programs in their community college system, all WIO eligible training providers, all adult education. This would be one place to look at. Kentucky, that's been one of the leaders in data systems for some time, is also doing some great work in that space as well. And by the way, we'll leave these slides with you for you to dig in further at your leisure. Okay, next I want to talk about what we think is a really exciting part of the space, and that is tracking non-degree credentials outside higher education. This is where the biggest black hole exists today. Strata realizes we were working on this problem in the last few years. No one had a solution to this problem. And so we brought together some of the biggest non-degree credential issuers in the country, folks like CompTIA, ISC2, NCCR, AWS, and others, MSSC and others. And they said, boy, it'd be great for us to be able to actually understand employment outcomes, occupational pathways, and by the way, also just the whole sector. This is a bigger, faster growing sector than higher ed, and people practically don't realize it exists, that it's out there. And so we ultimately realized we needed to create something new. We launched last year, in fact, literally a year ago, not quite to the day, but a year ago, we launched something called Credlens, a new national nonprofit data trust for non-degree credentials or workforce credentials. For those of you familiar with the National Student Clearinghouse, it's a little bit like that, but more focused on non-degree credentials and with a focus on outcomes. We built this national data trust. Some of the biggest non-degree credential issuers in the country are giving us all of their completion data, and we're able to connect that with private sources of employment outcomes data like Equifax. We believe we'll be able to connect to IRS data later this year to have gold standard employment outcomes for every state and eventually almost every non-degree credential in the country. Centralized, aggregated, verified insights and a robust privacy and security architecture. So that's something we created. It's literally just not quite a year old. We're about 20 employees. We're putting about $30 million into this. It's a big lift. It is one that it'll take quite some time before it is a break-even prospect, but we're really excited. We've gotten a lot of support from folks like Axum Collaborative and the Belk Endowment in North Carolina, Walmart and others are investing to help us bring this to life. Imagine a platform where you've got credential issuers contributing their data, the top outcomes data providers contributing that data source, and you're able to put that together into one comprehensive insights platform. These are not estimates. These are the actual earnings outcomes for completers. So great opportunity. For the first basically 18 months, we're letting the alpha customers participate at no cost in this. Earnings insights, job and employment outcomes, credential trends, benchmarking against other credentials. We're really excited about what Credlens is bringing to life. By the way, there's a website today. You can learn a little bit more. Credlens.org is out there. Just one little example. This comes from one of the first big community college systems that we're working with is looking at, when you look at a particular set of programs that are intended to lead to a certification, as you might imagine, the people that actually get the certification have better outcomes than the people that don't. But most states and community college systems have no way of knowing what that looks like. We're actually able to solve that problem. And what we'll be able to show is that those that get certified, end up having significantly higher wages on average than those that don't. It's just one example. There's all kinds of other interesting analyses that we can do at this work, looking at which credentials have the greatest earnings boost, which ones help to address supply-demand gaps most effectively in the labor market. Lots of exciting things coming from Credlens later this year. So that's one key piece. And by the way, you wouldn't have to do that, but if you don't use that, you'd have to create something comparable to get similar outcomes. What we're hoping to do with Credlens is to make this really easy for states, because what most of these big credential issuers are saying is, hey, why don't we just give you all of our data for the whole country? And that way, every time another state wants to participate, we don't have to go through this exercise over and over. So really exciting. All right, number 3. Implementing enhanced wage records. Most people have never heard about this, but I'm hoping to convince you in the next couple of minutes that this is a very important thing for Tennessee to do. Let me just simply put it this way. You would probably make the assumption that in Tennessee today, or any state for that matter, that you would have a way of knowing that the graduates of a particular program, not only what are their earnings, but what kind of jobs do they get. But you actually typically do not know that today. Right? You do know earnings, well, at least for degrees. You may not know it for non-degree credentials, but very rarely, even at the national level, is there a connection between earnings and the actual occupation. If you look at, for example, liberal arts graduates with a bachelor's degree, many of them get great jobs and professional roles, management, consulting, et cetera. Many of them are underemployed and they're working in frontline retail and they tend to get stuck there. If you look at the median wage outcome, all you're seeing is kind of the middle, when really it's the college level employed folks that are doing well and the folks that are underemployed are not doing well. You don't really have a way to see that in Tennessee today, just like almost every other state. So this is really about closing that gap. We're talking about 3 key answers that the data can't answer today. 1, most importantly, what types of jobs do completers hold? What occupation do they actually get? 2, in what region are they working? For any of you that do work in rural Tennessee, it's really important. The labor market's super different, Metro Nashville versus a more rural area. Understanding where those jobs are being created and where the gaps are is critical. And 3rd is how much is their hourly pay rate? When you look at the outcomes times for folks that are working like wage jobs, hourly jobs, and you see someone with low earnings, it might be they have low earnings. It might just be that they're working part-time, right? Being able to tell the difference is really important. These are the 3 gaps we're talking about closing. If you added these things, you could answer a bunch of really, really valuable questions. Are people getting jobs related to their training? Are they getting jobs in their local community, or are they having to lead for that? What are they actually making? But most importantly, perhaps for employers, where are the actual supply-demand gaps, and how could those be closed? West Virginia, South Carolina, a bunch of other states leading on this. We can talk more about that as we get into it. Finally, it's critical to not only collect the data, which is really what those first 3 steps are about, but to have dedicated insights capacity to really produce actionable insights based on that data. We call this a dedicated Office of Education Economics. You could call it whatever you want. States are different in kind of where they place this capacity, but I will just tell you, it is a critical investment to make, because while you can, for example, there was a great effort recently with TBR and THEC and ECD and a few other groups to produce some great reports as a one-time thing, but having a dedicated group doing this year-round, working on industry pathways, occupational pathways, answering critical questions about a variety of topics, this is one of the fastest growing trends in the country, and something that I think you all could do in Tennessee. In Virginia, I created one of these called the Virginia Office of Education Economics, or VOE. It looks at things like supply demand by program, occupation, and region. They're going to be doing lots of great work on non-degree credentials. These groups can also help with joint state talent plans, because when you think about TBR, the college and universities, the economic development regime, the workforce development boards, each of them has their own kind of distinct thing that they're doing, but there's also kind of a joint perspective that they could develop as well, and sort of a joint state talent plan. An office like this could help you to get there. So just in summary, 4 big opportunities for Tennessee. Track NDCs in higher ed, which you've already gone down the track a good bit on. Track NDCs outside higher ed, which could be through Credlens or some other solution. Third is enhance your wage records. This is the fastest growing change that's happening nationally. Almost 20 states are working to do this right now. And fourth, create some kind of dedicated Office of Education Economics. If you do those 4 things and you get them done in the next couple of years, you'll be the first state in the country to do it, and I definitely think you're going to be one of the first. We're excited to be a small partner in your efforts. Again, excited to be here today, and I'm looking forward to the panel discussion. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the panelists to the stage.
Stephen, for that. That was very helpful and so much information. So thank you for sharing that with us. And I'm excited to have our panel up here with us to really dive into some of what we just heard, which was a lot of information. And so we're going to spend the next bit here really thinking about what does it mean for Tennessee. I am excited that we have Stephen staying up here and joining us to share more about some of the things he walked through. But then we also have Commissioner Denise Thomas with the Tennessee Department of Labor and Workforce Development, Dr. Jeff McCord, President of Northeast State Community College, and Amity Schuyler, Chief Innovation Officer and Senior Vice President for Workforce Development at the Greater Memphis Chamber. So thank you all for being here with us. And so I want to start with just a quick kind of lightning round before we dive into the real meat of it, but would love to hear from each of you. And Stephen, I'll probably start with you and work back this way because I think you already shared a lot of this for yourself, but why are non-degree credentials important to you? And what are the opportunities top of mind for you related to non-degree credentials?
Sure, thanks. Thank you, Mary Cypress. To me, I would put it very simply. If we're going to be a country that offers pathways to opportunity for everyone, we need to ensure that we provide quality and clarity across all the available pathways. And that's, to me, what this is really all about. And I think we've done wonderful things for college degrees and college education, which needs to continue to be a big focus, but we need to give the same level of energy to these other pathways as well.
Commissioner Thomas?
So I think it's important because it's critical for Tennessee's competitiveness, both as a state and also for individual Tennesseans. As we can see from some of the data that you presented, Tennesseans want an opportunity to kind of do things in a different way that works for them. And so I think for the viability and sustainability of economic, sort of economic sustainability for families and individuals, we have to factor in this conversation. This is a very important one. I'm glad we're talking about it today.
Thanks. Jeff?
So at a high level, we consider our mission connecting people to prosperity and whatever means necessary. And so as was shown in the presentation, community college has something that's often called the hidden college. And so Northeast State, for example, serves 8,000 students. 2,000 of those are on the workforce side. 150,000 training hours that we delivered last year that aren't academic training hours, but just straight training hours. So it's core to our mission. We also are funded in performance funding for this mission. And so it remains very, very important to us.
Yeah, I think tagging off of what the commissioner said around competitiveness, also thinking about efficiency in upskilling people. So that non-degree credit allows that opportunity for an individual to get an upskill opportunity, some sort of industry competency or credential without having to formally enroll in college or TCAT or community college. And while the enrollment processes in Tennessee are very friendly, they're also still incredibly intimidating if you've never stepped foot on a college campus. For a city like Memphis, it's the fastest and most efficient pathway for economic mobility. The majority of Tennesseans have a highest degree of a high school diploma. That is true in every community that we live in, but particularly in large urban areas where your dropout rates are higher and you have a larger population that for whatever reason got left behind, the non-degree credential and the accessibility of those type of upskilling opportunities stand to be game-changing, not just for economic competitiveness, but again, to the commissioner's point, economic mobility.
Thanks for that to each of you. And obviously, non-degree credentials can play lots of important roles for all of these reasons, and that's probably why they're growing in popularity. And so want to spend a little bit of time thinking about the growing popularity and the growing role of non-degree in Tennessee. And you each have a lot of perspective you shared on that. But Jeff, I'd love to start with you with the post-secondary perspective. And thinking about the students, Northeast State, why do you think that non-degree credentials are growing in popularity for students? And what can you tell us about kind of what's inside a student's mind at Northeast State?
So I think it's important to understand, so 150,000 hours, most of those hours are with people who are currently employed. So I think that's something that, for a baseline here, that we are growing capability within the current workforce as much as anything. I think for us, it's also important to understand, for a long time now, we've not been the only educational system around. I know it's hard to believe, but I am a fully trained Six Sigma black belt with advanced statistics. None of that shows up on any transcript that you'll see in my educational journey. And that's probably the skill I use most in the current job I have now. So there are other educational systems that we need to recognize and hopefully absorb, or if we don't absorb them, to integrate with them. So I think, again, the investment is in capability, and if you're working with industry, that's what they're interested in mostly. And so, again, I think that is the interest that people have in non-degree credentials, is because they're valued to employers.
Thanks so much for that. So Amity, I want to turn to you to tell us about how non-degree credentials are important for attracting and expanding business across the state, but particularly in West Tennessee, particularly given what Jeff just shared.
Yeah, that's a great segue too. We didn't even plan that.
We did not.
We did not.
Thank you for putting my microphone on too.
I actually did it backwards and it's still working. So the little microphone is under the lapel, but anyway, we need a credential for that as well. Well, I will say, the Memphis Chamber, the Nashville Chamber, most of the chambers in Tennessee have dual roles. We do a lot of chambery things, but we're also economic development organizations. We wake up every morning to sell Memphis to the world, and to sell Tennessee to the world. I don't know if any of you have ever had the pleasure of sitting with a site selector or a site consultant, but by the time they get to your table in your conference room, they have already looked at your region by the numbers. And so once you get past electricity and water, the next topic is workforce, and that happens in about 6 minutes. And they've already looked at your saturation of talent, and that saturation of talent, your location quotients, are so incredibly important for them to be able to look at the numbers and go, yeah, there's probably enough machinists there for us to poach or get started, right? I mean, that's sort of how it works. But then you have to show the efficiency of being able to create talent and the speed of need to be able to create talent. While you might have a location quotient of 2 for machinists, you have a company coming in that needs 2,000 more, as an example. And so you have to be able to point to, not only do we have a saturation in the market, but here is how we can prepare them. Most of the industries coming in today just want to see the efficiency and speed of need. We just had a company come in. Would they love a full-blown 18-month to 24-month machinist? Absolutely, but that's actually not what they need. What they need are 3 NIMS credentials for benchwork safety, NIMS precision, and a little bit of lathe work, and the rest of everything that they do is proprietary. Right? So we can show that we can do that, but imagine, to Stephen's point, if we could capture those credentials in the data. Like, no, not only do we have 3,500 machinists that we can produce in a tri-state area, so we're a 3-state MSA every year, but we also credential this many in that NIMS precision measurement course. So as an example, we are doing, with a TVA grant, a NIMS precision measurement credential boot camp. So we're partnering with the Excel Center High School. Friday and Saturday, these adults that have gone back to school to get their traditional high school diploma are going through weekend boot camps. After 4 weekends, they will receive that NIMS precision measurement credential, which our industry has identified as important. It's the credential that teaches you how to measure and not cut your hand off, okay? When they get that credential, that is not going to show up in any data set for a site consultant that is judging us from afar by the numbers, right? But yet we can show the speed of efficiency and need. We need to be able to marry those into a system that makes Tennessee the most competitive state for workforce development in the country. We're very close. We just have to put a couple of those pieces together, to Stephen's point.
Thank you for that, Amity.
I get very excited.
I appreciate the excitement. I'm also excited because I think there's so much potential for students, for working Tennesseans,
Yes.
for employers, for our state. So there's a lot of potential here. And so, Stephen, I want you to zoom us out for a minute before we zoom back into Tennessee. But you spoke about how how little we know about the varying impact of non-degree credentials. And so tell us a little more about, what does Tennessee need to have in place so that non-degree credentials are driving a positive impact for our state, for students, for workers, for employers, for the state?
Thank you, Mary Cypress. Well, great question. First of all, I'd hit on the 4 things I discussed earlier, so I won't repeat those. But as the state looks at making these investments, I think thinking about what kind of sort of earnings outcomes does the state view as acceptable, I think starting to be able to track what % of completers actually get a job aligned with the training or education that they received. Again, impossible to do right now, but a big opportunity for the future. I think also looking at ROI. It's a tough thing to do with current data. It would be a great opportunity for the state. And I think finally, making all of this easier for people to understand, like once the data is actually captured, creating a very, very user-friendly way for people to explore all the pathways available to them.
Thanks for that, Stephen. I think those considerations are really important, and things that I know are top of mind for many state leaders here in Tennessee right now as thinking about workforce priorities and investments and incentives. We at SCORE have been really excited about many of Governor Lee's proposed vision around workforce and budget proposals and initiatives that are being proposed, including proposed millions of dollars in non-degree credentials, including micro-credentialing and training programs and trainings that meet the needs of incoming and existing businesses in our state. That's something we're really excited about. So Commissioner Thomas, I'd love to turn to you about why is the state, why are you prioritizing non-degree credentials as part of the workforce vision, and what strategies will your department use to know how these opportunities are supporting Tennesseans towards success?
Yeah, I don't need to tell anyone in this room, Tennessee is a fantastic place to be, both as a Tennessean and as a business and industry that's made the decision to be here in our great state. But when we look at our numbers, we know we needed to shift our priorities. We're going to be on the leading edge of economic mobility, again, for companies, for businesses, and for citizens. And so when we look at low unemployment numbers, right, and we look at labor force participation, which again lags the national average, we shifted our conversation to thinking about labor force potential. And although that is not a vetted national figure, that came from our labs within our walls, thinking about what's the potential of our workforce. And we really look at those that are not actively participating. The question is why, and how can we help accelerate some of these individuals, not just to getting sort of their foot on the first rung of the ladder into a job and ultimately, we hope, a career, but also folks that are working every day that need to be upskilled, that they're trying to increase their impact so that their wages go up, so that they can feel like they can take part in what is a very, very active economic environment in Tennessee. And so for us, the shift made sense. This is really what's happening in the workforce atmosphere. We really need to focus on non-degree credentials, and not in a way that it is sort of the stepchild to traditional academic paths. And I think that's something that for us was very easy to do, because workforce tends to really talk about the now. What does business need now, or how do we get you to work? So it was a very natural conversation for us. As far as strategies, we are talking about the enhanced wage records, because we know there's gaps in our data, that there's stories that we can't tell with precision. And so when we really start thinking about non-degree credentials, I think our strategy has to shift to really paying attention to what's working, but working in different ways. Because when we talk about high value credentials, and folks in the room that have heard me say this before, I think the value definition is one that has to be very, very relative. Because if I'm not working and my family is low income, any job is value to me if it's helping me keep the lights on. And so I really think digging down into non-degree credentials, but having it vast enough that it can speak to those that are not working, even to those that are underemployed and looking to upskill and get more, it has to speak to all of Tennesseans who are on that path. And so to your point about making it plain and simple, this cannot be theoretical. It has to be practical. It has to be very easily discerned. So if I'm an individual that wants to go after a non-degree credential, I shouldn't feel like this is side work. Right. I should feel like this is a core part of what I'm doing to build my own competitiveness in the labor market. And I think it's up to us to create that, not only create the path, but create sort of the rigor and the standards and the value of that as well. And so for us, all of those backroom conversations were buzzing, because we said this is where we have to be. And Tennessee does need to be at the forefront of this. And I hope your prediction comes true, that we are the first state that can get it all done. Yes, we do. We believe you.
So close.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm very inspired by that, and I think that is the opportunity why everyone in this room is here today.
Not competitive at all.
But we'll win.
Yes. But a key piece to the puzzle in ensuring that is that we are making sure that Tennesseans the credentials they're earning are the ones that are valued by employers and are going to result in their ability to get those jobs. And so, Amity, I'd love to hear you reflect a little bit on how can we engage industry and leverage data to understand which credentials do employers value and are needed?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we could put one word to how to engage industry, and I feel like I'm preaching to the choir with the folks in this room, is agility. You have to be willing to stay agile and listen to what it is that they need, because it is changing more quickly than ever before. I think in the old times, there was a space where we build a program, then we bring industry to the table, and yes, it works, it doesn't work, okay, and then we talk once every 2 or 3 years. And when I say we, I'm just reflecting on my own experiences in education. I don't think that that's the practice now. But this has got to be continuous discourse. The workspace and the workplace is changing so quickly, it's going to be very difficult for education and training to keep up unless you are constantly talking to one another and saying, yes, this is what we need, no, this is what we don't need. Again, again, most employers, I'm just going to use manufacturing for an example, they'll say, yeah, give me the machinist, because they know that the machinist is going to have something that they need. But in reality, when you start to dissect the pieces of a machinist program and they look at the competencies of the credentials in that program, they go, oh, well, we really only need this one and maybe this one. And they don't know in many cases as an employer that that is packaged into a credential. They just thought that they had to wait for the 24 months for the machinist to come out of a program. All of that to say, they know what they need, but they don't speak the fluent language that we speak to understand and articulate how we produce it on our end. So front-loading the relationship and keeping that relationship front and center is incredible. I think also the more we talk to employers, the more opportunity for public-private partnerships we have, and the more our universities and community colleges and TCATs thrive. There are a lot of employers doing their own credentialing and training that could easily be picked up and should be picked up by our university and college system, because they do what you do best, and then employers should be doing what they do best. But they have adopted this mantle of having to do it themselves because they don't completely understand the capabilities and the flexibility of our education systems. And so the more frequently you talk, the more opportunity there's going to be for those partnerships, and everybody gets back to doing what they do well.
Thank you for that, Amity, and I appreciate the kind of push for collaboration and partnership at the end there. Stephen, I want to come back to you. We've talked about this need to align the two and the opportunities there and what that has the potential for our state. But we know that data is an issue and an essential piece of that to ensure that that can happen. And so as Tennessee invests in non-degree credentials as a strategy to support workforce development and our Tennesseans as a whole, how can we ensure that data actually leads to actionable insights about the connections between the credentials, student and worker opportunity, and a thriving state economy?
Sure. I think the foundational elements are the ones that I referenced earlier. There's 4 key pieces, but then that translation piece is really critical. And by the way, I was super inspired by the comments of the other panelists, and I agree with all those great points. But one of them I wanted to hit on was what Amity talked about. Like, it's not just the data, it's also, there's a qualitative piece of understanding where the employers are. And so having that, whatever you call that team that's sort of dedicated to do that analytical work, the dream scenario is if they're not just doing the data piece, but they're engaging directly with employers, leveraging regional chambers that are having a lot of those conversations as well, to kind of put all those things together to produce insights. And then make sure that the sort of actionable insights from that work are available in a digestible way for all the key stakeholder groups, whether it's the institution leaders, the training providers, the policymakers, the employers, and of course the learners themselves.
Thanks for that, Stephen. And with that need of having clear information in mind that includes all of those pieces, Jeff, I want to come to you. How does Northeast approach collecting data on non-degree credential outcomes and communicating that to students and to industry in the region and others? Are there barriers to that? What comes up for you? Sure,
there's always barriers. Let me speak to that a couple, and then I'm going to pick a fight with SCORE after this, so stay tuned. So setting some context. So apprenticeships at the community college level, we sponsor apprenticeships and industry sponsors apprenticeships. There's a lot of advantage for industry when we sponsor a group apprenticeship. Our apprentices in our group, we have all the data that you ever want to have, including wage progression, where you live, where you started, what your job is. And so we have a lot of data there. On the short-term training, non-apprenticeship training, we report up to THEC, and we have a little bit less. We're just basically counting what you did. There's no wage at the end of that. With the employer-sponsored, we're delivering certificates to those apprentices, but all that data is their data, the private data. So we have very little data there. So it depends is the answer. And now you ready for the fight? Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
Tell me.
So I have to say, when I saw apprenticeships as short-term, all our apprentices spend 4 years in their program.
Yeah, right.
And to call it a journeyman certificate is, I hate that term because it's a degree.
Right.
Learning the best possible learning model that you can go through. So So that's fight one. And the second one is your second bullet point there, that it doesn't lead to a degree. Now that's unacceptable. And so at Northeast State, just last week, we articulated the machine tool apprenticeship and the mechatronic apprenticeship to our academic side so that you can finish your apprenticeship and then in a semester you're done with your associates. And your economic mobility increases because we articulate to the universities as well. So you can start there in that different system and come over to this system and go back and forth between the systems. And so anyway, you're going to have to say, except for Northeast State.
Well, that's why you're on the panel, is because you're the one doing it well. You're the exemplar.
Well, there is, I think Commissioner Thomas can talk to, there is a lot of, if it's a formal registered apprenticeship, there's a lot of data there. And we have visibility at the local level because we know that we're creating value for employers, especially because we get repeat business. But as far as aggregating that data and putting in a way that you can set policy, we do have a big gap.
Thank you for sharing.
But may I make a point? Because I think this calls out Stephen's earlier point. As we're having these conversations, nomenclature and semantics matter more than ever. And when we don't get it right, it really does confuse employers as well. And so I just
and individuals.
To your point, I mean, we were just going to have to continue to do the lift in getting that nomenclature and semantics fine-tuned.
I completely agree. I think that your fight that
Are we
I'll
still
just let
friends?
you win. We're
Oh,
still
yeah.
friends.
Okay.
I think is so true, and I think
great
it
life
further elaborates the complexity of the umbrella of non-degree credentials, and showcases the value of them when you're doing it well, like you all are at Northeast. So having that information is essential, and it enables you to be able to do what you're doing there. And can really create insights. And so Commissioner Thomas, I'd love to come back to you and thinking about the Department of Labor and Workforce Development. How can Tennessee really help to, kind of two things. One, help to shine light on where are there these non-degree credentials really matching our state's workforce needs, and is there a list or other way to be able to do that at the state level to help shine some of that light?
Yeah, I think, THEC obviously has done some great work. Even, Department of Education has done work. I think where Tennessee works, and the governor's charge to really do this now, is bringing all of that disparate work together in one state framework. I think if we're honest, this is not a new concept to Tennessee. We've all been in the non-degree space. We've just been doing it inside of our own walls, trying to figure it out. I think coming together and being able to have not an exhaustive list, but I think a list that says, these are the credentials that really speak to needs of Tennessee and where we know we have value, with the asterisk that value is relative. Because I think to Amity's point, the way we talk about this is what's going to frame people's belief and confidence in this pathway that we're developing for everyone. And so being able to have this list helps us do a couple of things. It obviously helps with resource allocation. It helps us to evaluate, because with the workforce changes, the speed of change in workforce is so dynamic and so rapid, it's never going to be this one static list. It's going to change all the time. Some of that will be informed with qualitative data from employers that says, no, we don't need that anymore. We need 2 clicks to the right. Some of that will be informed by just quantitative data. When we look at wages, maybe it's not having the bang that it once did. And so I think this is work that will be evolving for years to come in our state, but we can all agree that we do need that inventory. We need a repository of credentials. And I'm not suggesting that we need 1 million of them, but I am suggesting that we should be able to speak the same language as a state about those that have value. But I also think we have to have specificity and customization, meaning what matters in Northeast, we got to be okay with that if it's not the same for Memphis, right? And so I think this list, again, has to have some geographic design to it. And I think, again, it has to be very responsive to the needs of business and industry. And so for labor, we're really thinking about this not just from our department. This is our state's approach. These are all the other agencies and partners and organizations that are participating in this work. But the time really is now. I mean, we're watching states that at one point were kind of watching us from the sideline that are rapidly creating their own credential inventory. Alabama has done a really good job. Arkansas has done some work. So now it's time for us to do it. And again, I just want us to, this will be a comma, not a period. Right. And so as we kind of get our legs under us and start the exploration phase of this work, it's really going to be important to make sure we're listening to a lot of people to inform this. And again, I'll just say, you picked the fight with apprenticeship, so I didn't have to. But again, I think for folks that, and I'll say this lastly and move on, we have a lot of folks in Tennessee that have found a way to work and bring value to their lives. And we have to start looking into the validity of some of that. And just because it hasn't caught up to our speak doesn't mean it doesn't have value. You have people finding ways every single day, and they've been able to show skills, and a lot of them in ways that is meaningful to them. I don't think it's right for us to come and wipe all that away because we haven't figured out what it should look like. We need to really pay attention to that, and how can we create an environment where all work is being looked at and all skills are being looked at as valuable.
I will add something to that too, is as soon as you get your list, that's great. But as soon as you say these particular ones will receive financial aid, then you really have something. That we are going to help fund these particular ones and have some good reasons for it. And then, but I think that's when you start really making progress.
That's why we ask for a lot of money, Jeff.
Yeah. You always have some more than you need.
I think that's what's so exciting about the potential here. And so I want to end with us on two questions for each of you, but we can spend some time on these. First one is, I would love to, and I'll tell you both of them so you can be thinking about it together, but first one is, would love to hear, we just heard about so much potential of this and what can be true, and would love to just spend a minute on kind of what are some of the challenges or barriers today, and we'll go down the line on that, but then we'll come back to then, what's the one thing you individually think that we need to do in Tennessee to prioritize this? But let's start with just making sure we're all clear on kind of what are the barriers that we need to be overcoming in order to make this true. And Amity, I'll start with you, and we'll move down.
I think perception, the perception that a credential is somehow less than or less important to the economy, to the individual, to self-worth even, is something that we have got to start addressing.
And so I would say integration or articulation to value whatever that work is on this side of the system, and TBR is really trying within its own system to do that, but also with these other educational systems. And that, to me, that's what's exciting about my job, to be able to help facilitate that and show, this is how it can actually work.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, I think for me, it's absolutely been a data quality and data discernment has been a barrier to really sort of pull all this together, to be able to tell the story, to sort of create the urgency to do what we're doing right now. Because of the data gaps, it's hard to link it all together. So I think that's going to require a lot of work, a lot of intentionality, but I also think we have some very big brains across the state who can get it done.
Thank you. And Stephen, you're obviously not in Tennessee thinking about this, but nationally, what are some of those barriers?
Well, I was going to say, I have to just completely endorse Commissioner Thomas's point about data quality and data discernment. The thing about the data is, it's not that it solves the problem by itself, right? But it enables, it's like fertilizer, basically. It enables everything to work better, and it gives people the information needed to improve outcomes.
I appreciate that. And so with that in mind, and with this conversation in mind, and everything we've heard and talked about today, a question for each of you, and we'll start with you, Stephen, this time and work back down to Amity, but what is one thing that Tennessee should do to prioritize non-degree options that unlock opportunities for Tennesseans and for our state? What's the one thing that you would recommend that we do? So Stephen, we'll start with you.
If I had to pick one, I would say for Tennessee to choose to lead the country on understanding outcomes of non-degree credentials.
Big charge to you, Commissioner Thomas.
Yeah, so I'll do a 1A, 1B if I can. I think 1A is the galvanizing work that's already happening, right? It's for everybody to come together, although we may have philosophical differences, and say this is the best direction for our state and get behind that one thing. Then the 1B would be fund the budget request that I asked for.
There you go. Anytime you get the chance, go ahead. Anytime. So employers, at the local level, we have these conversations where we know what matters, what skills you need to develop, and to your point, what actually matches up there. I really think you take half a dozen or whatever the number is of credentials, and you fund them and you track them and you see what works, and you build the systems around that have to be there because you're funding them, or providing some sort of financial aid. I think then you start quit planning and start making progress. Goes from idea to execution at some level. So I think that's what I would say.
Yeah, I'm going to take the Commissioner's 1B and make it my 1A, and that is, in order to make this work, you have to unlock the money. So you've got to fund it at the labor level, so yes to her budget, please, but then also thinking about how you unlock the Tennessee Promise funds to allow for the credential as well inside of the border regions, particularly in the THEC systems. My 1B would be, we've got a lot of work to do in the private sector and with employers. I mean, it's very difficult for us to do our best work if in the private sector job descriptions haven't been updated for 20 years. There hasn't been any type of outward facing statements around equipment changing. They're not signaling major shifts in skill needs. So we've got a lot of work to do in the private sector, and certainly we're carrying that water at the chambers. I know all of the chambers are, so that the private sector and the employer gets better at coming to the table and articulating and collaborating.
Thank you for that, Amity.
Yep.
And to each of our panelists, I think this has been so helpful in really understanding what is the opportunity of non-degree credentials and what does Tennessee have the opportunity to do for Tennesseans and for our state as a whole. And so with that, I want to leave us here today with a few things that are top of mind for SCORE as we think about non-degree credential space. We know that there are so many credential pathways, from bachelor's degrees and associate's degrees and advanced degrees. And we know that non-degree credentials are an important part of that in order to really meet the full opportunities of our state. And so want to just share some closing thoughts around where do we see the priorities to best advance this, which our panelists just really elaborated on. But first, strengthening that data collection and reporting and discernment, as we talked about, that is so critical, so that these options that are growing in popularity we can know how they're actually meeting the potential that we just discussed. We've got to look at that information to understand the impact. We've got to know, is it actually resulting in what workforce needs and leading to those wages that can really help us know, are Tennesseans able to go from unemployed or underemployed to meeting their family's needs? And then finally, with that information, we can prioritize non-degree credentials that have the biggest impact. And we can really target our efforts as a state to improve these education and training to career opportunities and pathways so that individuals and our state economy can both thrive. That is a really exciting potential here, and that's why we're excited to have this conversation and shine light on this important issue. Want to thank you all for being here today and for caring about this issue, both to those in the room as well as the folks who are online today. You have the memo in your seat. You can also get a digital copy of it here on the left, and then the impact credential framework we mentioned. Feel free to scan the QR code on the right, or there are some in the lobby as well. We will follow up with the information from today's discussion as a follow-up to this, but want to thank you all for being here and look forward to working with you in the future. Thanks. Thank you, panelists.